Hey guys, it's Scott Beebe. This is a talk that I recently gave at Live Oak Christian Church when our pastor Michael was out of town. Enjoy.
So it was hard to describe what we saw. We were standing in a skylift, a cable car. Not one of those where like two people sit on and they're riding up a mountain. These are one of those where like 30 people are inside. And it's held up by a cable. And so you feel a little nervous, right? When you're in this cable car. And so you're on top of this cliff, and the cliff, if you were to turn it up on end, would probably be a football field or two high. And so you're hanging, swinging in a cable car, 30 other people, cable, cliff. And you're looking down. So you're feeling a little bit vulnerable, right? And so we're sitting here and we're hanging high over this cliff, and the Alps are all around us. And the glaciers, they're beginning to melt, and they're creating this sort of, this background roar of music that then flows down into this ice-cold creek. So we're standing by this creek after we got off the cable car, and there's this guy, I think he was from Indonesia, and he was drinking water out of the creek, and then we were drinking water out of the creek, and all of this stuff was moving around, and you look up, and the peak of the Alps look like they're just uncontrolled shards that have shot out of the ground, and they're holding the stars up. I mean, it's amazing what we're seeing. The valley that is created by these mountains that are surrounded. It's almost like this valley is an amphitheater. And there's this constant symphony that's being played, but the symphony is interesting because there's no conductor. There's no physical conductor that you can see in the middle of the valley, this amphitheater, that is conducting the music. There's nobody there that is kind of telling these glaciers to melt. There's nobody there cueing the waterfalls. Come into the waterfall. There's nobody there cueing the birds to fly over as this kind of visual aspect of the symphony. There's nobody there to crescendo the sunshine and then bring a decrescendo of the sunshine back down as the clouds begin to build and build and build and build, and then they break. And it's just blue sky. We were sitting there watching this. And it doesn't matter if you were there when we were there or you're there right now. There's a symphony going on right now in this place. What I'm describing for you is what we saw, but if I were to put a definition on what we saw, these are individual motifs that make up a one-of-a-kind song that our family got to stand in the middle of on this vulnerable town in the middle of the Swiss Alps called Mürren, Switzerland. In fact, the Campbells have gotten to visit that same area here in the last few days. They got to witness the same symphony, but the same symphony is now playing different tunes within the symphony. And yet there's nobody conducting any of it in the physical form. And so it's a constant collection of these motifs. Motifs are interesting. Motifs are just simple little snippets, a combination of notes that when put together create a larger song. You listen to motifs all day long. If you turn on Spotify or Pandora or whatever, what you're listening to is individual motifs that have been put together, collected together to create a song. One song is nothing more than a collection of individual motifs. It's what we got to see was all this collection of motifs around. And so if you were to ask Jesus, hey, why did you come? Like, why the birthday? What we just got done celebrating. Why did you come here? Why did you leave paradise, as to what we're told? Why did you leave paradise to come to brokenness? Why did you leave the mansion on the hill to come down to an auto body repair shop down here in the valley? And why did you do that? And Jesus got asked questions like this, not those exactly, but questions like this over and over and over again. Why are you here? Why did you come? And every time he would respond with a motif. Mark documented one of his responses in the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament. And we're going to be in multiple places this morning, but this was in Mark 2:17. Jesus said, the reason I'm here, it's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's the sick. I did not come to call the righteous people. I came to call the sinners. It was a motif. There was another writer, he's a doctor, his name was Luke. He documented Jesus saying this motif: I came to seek and to save that which is lost. There's another guy named Matthew who wrote the very first book in the New Testament. He documented Jesus' motif by saying this: I came to serve and give my life as a ransom. And then there's John. This kind of somewhat emotional, more beloved disciples, what we're told. And in John, in the book of John, chapter 18, he documents Jesus' motif this way: I came to bear witness to the truth. Every single time Jesus is responding to somebody who is either overtly or subconsciously asking the question, why are you here? And I think on December 31st of 2017, it's a valid question for us to ask ourselves. Why are you here? Each of Jesus' responses was a motif of a larger whole, a larger mission, a larger song that all played into a single act of kindness. We've been talking about this single act idea for the entire month of December. Each week you've been getting a different motif of a larger whole. The larger whole is the single act of kindness, and that's what Jesus was laser focused on bringing. And so have you ever noticed in all things, the one question we're always wanting to understand is the why. Doesn't matter what age you are. If you're 3, you ask why. If you're 16, you ask why, right? If you're 27, you sound a little bit overinflated and you're like, why? Why would we do that? If you're 42, you still ask why. If you're 73, you ask why. Geographically, the question why has no bounds. If you're in the United States, you ask why. If you're in Spain, you ask por qué. If you're across the border in France, you ask pourquoi. Bakit, giati. It doesn't matter where you're at in the world. We all want to know the same question and the answer to the same question. That is why. And Jesus got asked that question all the time. And the reason we want to know why is not because of the why. We want to know what's behind the why. We want to know the underlying motivation behind the why. We want to understand the underlying purpose behind the why. Now, I love the word purpose. It's a word we talk about a lot, but it's also a word that can sometimes get a little bit drowned out in the discussion. But purpose helps us to understand the bedrock behind someone's decision making. So we understand their motivation, their purpose. We understand their motive, what drove them to that particular action. The reason we ask why is because it helps us to understand the raw reality of why you're doing what you're doing. When we understand your why, when I get to understand your purpose, your motivation, your motive, then I begin to understand the deep inner heart of your decision. And if I can understand the heart behind your decision, then I can understand your sincerity. And then if I can understand your sincerity, then I can understand if your why is something that I can invest in. That's the real reason I want to know your why. It's not because of you. Sounds a little self-serving, doesn't it? The reason we ask the why is not necessarily for your benefit, the person that we're asking. The reason we ask the why is because at the end of the day, I want to know if you are someone or something that I can invest my time, my energy, my resource in. One of my favorite verses in the entire Old Testament, we talk about this all the time, Monday through Friday. God and Habakkuk are having this discussion. I would have loved to have heard it. Habakkuk's getting a little whiny. In the book Habakkuk chapter 2, chapter 1, he's getting a little whiny. And finally in chapter 2, it's as if God kind of had enough. In the way that God is ever patient and loving, but I think sometimes God in the Bible just kind of had enough. And I think he had had enough. And so he responds to Habakkuk. He says, I want you to write the vision down. I want you to await its appointed time so that those who read it may run. I want you to write the vision down, await its appointed time, so that those who read it may run. When you take an idea and you speak it, it doesn't have near as much power as when you take an idea and you write it. Michael Gerber, the author of the foundational small business book, E-Myth, he says, if you don't write it down, you don't own it. And it's true, right? You don't write it down, you don't own it. Can you imagine having this brilliant idea for this social media app that allowed all these friends to come together, and it was as if your face was in a book, and you put those two things together, and it had likes and hearts and thumbs up and messenger, and it had all these things, and you thought, man, I ought to call that Facebook. And then all of a sudden, Mark Zuckerberg designs Facebook in the madness of his mind and in some dorm room in Harvard, turns it into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And you go to the judge and you're like, this is all in my head, man. He can't steal my idea. If you don't write it down, you don't own it. So part of the power of taking a vision that's in your head and getting it down on a sheet of paper is once it's down on a sheet of paper, you own it. Then you get to decide what you do with it. The real reason I want to know your why is because I want to see it written down on a sheet of paper, because if it's written down on a sheet of paper, now I can decide whether or not I want to follow you or not. If I told you that after the service today I was going to get in the car and go to the garbage dump, who wants to go with me? I wrote it down. We're going to the garbage dump. That's my vision. That's my destination after this service. Who's going to go with me? Not many of you. But on the other hand, if I said, hey, we're going to hop a plane and go to Fiji, you're all welcome. Who's going to go with me? It's just written down, right? Two totally different emotions. The same thing. I had a vision. Both of them are visions. Both of them are destinations. When we ask Jesus why, what we're really asking him is, Jesus, should I buy into you? You're not asking Jesus why just because you're curious. Hey, Jesus, why'd you come? I came to seek and to save that which was lost. Oh, cool, man. It's great. We're asking him because we're trying to decide if we too want to jump on that train to help him seek and to save that which is lost. I think one of the most powerful moves in all of history was the fact that God decided to spread his word through writing it down. Because he wrote it down, now he owns it. And now we get to decide whether it's something that we want to follow or not. You get to decide that every day. When we ask Jesus is why, we're asking, should I buy into you? Should I forego mainstream and instead invest in something that's very peculiar? Should I exchange what is comfortable for today for what is unseen tomorrow? Should I ask and risk acceptance in exchange for perceived rejection? Have you thought about this before? I'm going to take you on a little aside here. Have you ever thought about the reality that all of us are songwriters in a studio? And what you're doing today, whether or not you're 42 or you're 23 or you're 3 or whatever, is you're writing a song. You're writing individual motifs on a Sunday that are going to be joined together with all the other motifs that you've written to create your hit single at the end of your life. That's what you're doing right now. When you meet someone new and you ask, hey, so what do you do? Where are you from? What brought you here? What you're really trying to figure out is their rhythm. You're trying to figure out what's been written down. You're trying to figure out the song that they're writing with the individual motifs of where they're at today. You thought about this, every song follows a similar template. Think about it. So you've got Adele or Michael Jackson or Ed Sheeran or whoever, and they're writing this song. What's the template of a song? Well, the first element of the template of a song is you got to have some joy or struggle. Like nobody ever wrote a song that was like, hey, I woke up and it was sunshine and everything was good. It's just not that interesting. It's either got to be this mountaintop joy, like, oh my goodness, it's a rush. Or it's got to be this in-depth struggle. So the first element of writing a song is a joy or struggle and the awareness of that joy and struggle. But then it does no good because we can't consume your joy or the struggle, which leads to the second step. You got to package that joy or that struggle into a story. Once you package it into a story, now it's transferable. Now I can give it to a 13-year-old. I can give it to an 18-year-old. I can give it to a 4-year-old. Barney and Friends, right? I don't know that Barney ever really had any struggles, though. I think it was all highs. But anyway, you get to package that joy or that struggle so that we can then consume that. Third element of writing a song is once you've become aware of the joy or struggle, once you've packaged that into a story, now it's time to transfer the emotion. Because what good is a story without us feeling it with you? And so when you see Adele stand up on a stage in this gown and she just, it's amazing. She doesn't sound like that, by the way, but you know what I'm saying. And she doesn't move, but you can feel it. She's like, oh. Recently, my daughter and I were listening to Ed Sheeran got together with Botticelli, Andreas Botticelli or whatever, the tenor voice from Italy. Unbelievable. Like, I don't know if you can call that religious. I don't know what you call it. But when we got done with the song, we were just like, oh my gosh. That was unbelievable. There was a transfer of emotion. And so Ed Sheeran realized the joy of the struggle he was in. He packaged it into a story called The Song. And then through the elements of him and Botticelli, they got together and they transferred that emotion so you felt it. But what good is a song unless you act? That's the fourth element in any good song. It's one thing to be awareness of the joy of struggle, to package it in a story, to transfer the emotion. You go, yes! And then the lights come on and you leave. The fourth element of the story is you got a call to action. Darius Rucker just put out a new song called For the First Time. Listen to the melody. When was the last time you did something for the first time? You let yourself go. Come on, follow that feeling. Maybe something new is what you're needing, like a real life. Let your hair down. Feel alive for the first time. It's It's a call to action. A good song has a call to action. The infamous Jay-Z said of a song, he said every good song has to have the key elements. It's got to have melody, it's got to have emotion, but it's got to have a strong statement that becomes a part of the social fabric and the social vocabulary. That's that call to action. It's calling you to do something beyond what you're doing right now. Anybody know the most famous song of all time? It's just a thriller. Michael Jackson, Thriller, documented the most famous song of all time. I want you to think about that song and how I think that song was like 8 hours long. You've got struggle, you've got drama, you've got dance, you've got the moonwalk, you've got that little shake leg thing, you've got all sorts of drama and emotion and feeling caught up in that song, which are created by individual motifs. You've got dark and light and down and up and daylight and night, all in the same song. Because this is Thriller, Thriller night, and no one's going to save you from the beast that's about to strike. You know, it's Thriller, Thriller night. You're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller night. Motifs, lyrics, they come together and they elicit emotion. One of the reasons we want to know the why behind Jesus is because we want that emotional part of who we are triggered. We want to know, are you worth investing in? Jesus' life is a collection of lyrics that create for us a song that unearth his why. So when we stand and listen to one motif, one lyric, we might not get the fullness, versus if we stand back and look at the whole life's work. And so all of Jesus' statements act as this sort of lyric. Recently, National Geographic just did another expose on Jesus. Most historic journalists, I guess all journalists are historic, but anyway, most journalists who are trying to go back and do research, many of them want to dig into the life of Jesus because they're so fascinated by it. Whether or not they're atheist or Buddhist or Christian or whatever. They want to go back and they want to begin to unearth why. And that's really what they're asking. The reality of why they're doing investigative journalism on Jesus is because they want to know the why. They want to know the full song, the story. They want to know if we're crazy for investing in him. What was his motive? What was his purpose? Jesus never really confused words when somebody would ask. He might be confusing in his response, but he never confused words when he spoke. Sometimes it makes me wonder, because Jesus was so clear when he was asked why, he would be so upfront about it. I wonder some of the times if the reason we're asking Jesus why is not so much because we want to know Jesus' why, but instead because we're having such a hard time trying to figure out our own. So it's really not about him. It's really about the reality that we're confused when we wake up on a Sunday morning and go, like, what am I doing today? We're trying to figure out our own motivation, what gets us out of bed, why we woke up on a Sunday, and what it's going to take to wake up on a Monday or on a Wednesday or on a Friday and do something different than what we did in the past. Sometimes our minds can scream so loud that it drowns out the actual purpose of why the mind was created in the first place. The louder things get, the more we are thirsty for clarity and simplicity. I want you to think about the holidays for you. My guess is the volume got turned up a little bit around Thanksgiving, and then a little bit louder, and then a little bit louder, and then a little bit louder, and a little bit louder, and at some point you just stop! You just wanted quiet. And then in the quiet, you didn't know how to handle it. That was me. You can ask Ashley, how many times this week I was at my house quiet? Is it okay if I sit down? Like, I literally asked that question this week. Is it okay if I just sit down and read? I had to go out on a 14-foot John boat last night by myself for 2 hours just to make myself feel okay, that it was okay to sit down. We don't know what to do with quiet. We're so thirsty to be able to answer the why questions for ourselves in the same clarity that Jesus answered the why question when he was asked. Now, I do want to be clear. I want to be very clear. You finding out your why as if it's a bullseye has no effect on God's perception of who you are. You finding out and coming to great clarity on who you've been created to be has no bearing on how God sees you. That's an important distinction because some of you will go an entire lifetime and constantly be confused as to what your purpose here on earth has been. The reality is, it's not dependent on getting your why right. And He still offers you life. God still invites you to celebrate life while the world around you is biased towards brokenness. God still invites you to celebrate life while the world around you is biased towards brokenness. It's just a reality. Not a doomsdayer. I don't get into that stuff, but the reality is we're biased towards brokenness. God's love for you is not dependent on you figuring out your singular purpose. If your body and your mind were locked and you couldn't do anything, you had no thoughts, you had no reaction, no emotion, no feeling, no nothing, that does not change God's overwhelming love for who you are. So then the question becomes, if you're there, you go, well, then why even bother trying to figure out who I've been created to be? Why even bother to try and figure out my purpose, to excruciate over the individual motifs or lyrics that are creating this larger song? If God loves me regardless, why bother? Jesus said in John, documented in John 10:10, He said, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Now, you've probably heard that verse before, but I want you to re-look at that verse. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it. The word actually means in vehemence. I've come that you might have life and to have it vehemently, excessively, overwhelmingly. God has not created us just for average and mundane, vanilla, garden variety. He uses garden variety people. This is the moment where you begin to cue the crescendo, where the music begins to build. The clouds begin to bellow right before they break. Jesus did not come to extend to us average. He came to extend to us in excess. Excess in compassion, excess in service, excess in relationship, excess in generosity. How many of you were here for the fancy schmancy Christmas party? Everybody here? So this room, that room, outside. Was that average, garden variety, and normal? No. That was excess. Did you see like what Kevin and Eric were wearing? The food was like I don't even know how to describe what. There was bacon. Wait, that was wrapping the shrimp. So we had shrimp and bacon, and then you could go to the potato bar and get bacon crumbles on the potatoes, or not even get the potatoes and just put the bacon crumbles on the shrimp that was wrapped in bacon like I did. That was excess. Excess in generosity. That Southern Graces crew was generous all over the building that night. And that was a God moment. Jesus came for excess. He said, I came to give sight to the blind. He came for excess for us to be able to see. Excess in unity. Excess in forgiveness. Jesus' single act of coming set the stage for a multi-scene act of compassion, of generosity, of reconciliation, and of stability. I want to think about that word for just a second, stability. We talk about balance. This year, 2018, I'm going to have balance. No, you're not. You're not. It's not going to happen. So we talk about this word balance and stability. I want you to think about this. We use this phrase a lot. Boy, everything's changing, isn't it? Everything's just changing so fast. No, it's changed, bro. Like we're living the Jetsons now. You realize that? We're living the Jetsons now. We don't wear pagers and poodle skirts anymore. Like we're beyond that. We don't print with dot matrix printers and churn our own butter anymore. We don't do that. At least to live. Some people might do that for fun. But we don't do those things. Man, let me prove this to you. Hey, Alexa, when was Amazon founded?
Amazon.com formed in 1994.
Remember that. Hey, Alexa, when was Google founded?
Google formed in 1998.
Remember that. Hey, Alexa, when was Facebook founded?
Facebook formed in 2004.
If Amazon were a child, he would have just graduated from graduate school. If Google were a human being, she would have just graduated from college. And if Facebook were a person, she'd be in middle school. It's already changed. If I told this machine right now, that I hate you, many of you would feel empathy for the machine. Right? I already tried this earlier, and somebody in the room was like, oh. It's silicon chips and plastic and fabric. Everything's changed already. You know what Amazon's market cap is? $570 billion. Everybody thinks Walmart's the biggest company in the world. You know what Walmart's is? $294. Almost half of what Amazon is. And Amazon just graduated from graduate school. Everything's changed. That ship sailed. Instability is the new world order on mass commercial scale. I want you to hear what I just said. Instability is the new world order on mass commercial scale. And within the noise, softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. I use that hymn for a reason, because right when I was writing this, no lie, right when I was writing this, I was listening to the Josh Garrell station on my headphones, sitting in Bojangles in a quiet corner by myself. I was typing, and this song came on. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. Right at the moment I was writing this. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, come home. You who are weary, come home. The surround sound of life is swirling in chaos. And yet softly and tenderly, Jesus is sitting right over there in kind of a quiet corner. And he's simply saying, come home and I will share with you exactly why I've created you. If you're willing to come over here. Softness and tenderness is the defining desire of our time, and yet none of us want to admit it because it sounds weak when we say it. What's your word for 2018? Softly and tenderly. Right before, we don't want to admit it. It used to be that our families had too much quiet time. Back in the 1700s, 90+% of families lived on farms. We had all the quiet time in the world, right? Today, 1.3% of families live on farms. The rest of us live in swirling chaos. The ship sailed. It's gone. It's all changed. Now we're a culture on devices, and it ain't going away. One of Ashley's and I's goal this year is to learn Snapchat and Instagram like a boss so that we can be more engaged with our kids. I don't get it. I don't get it, but I'm trying to get it. Because I realize that I want our kids to be able to see the reality that softly and tenderly Jesus is calling when they get tired. And so we've got to be able to communicate with them. It's perfectly normal to strip away the noise, the chaos, the extra features, and get to the root of the thing. That's what we want to try and do. Gary Keller, who is one of the co-founders of Keller Williams Real Estate, has a powerful question in his book, The One Thing. He says, what's the one thing, we use this in coaching all the time, what's the one thing that by doing that one thing makes all other things easy or unnecessary? It's a powerful question. So going into 2018, what's the one thing that by doing that one thing makes all other things easy or unnecessary? This year, you're going to have to become really, really, really good at stripping as much noise away as possible for a limited period of time before it creeps right back in. And then doing it again. That's what's called personal and spiritual disciplines. And we've got to be really good at it. He's got a great quote in that book, by the way. It says, he lambasts multitasking. He's like, multitasking doesn't work. It's a lie. Get over it. And he quotes this one guy and he says, multitasking is merely the ability to screw up more than one thing at a time. Nick Saban, who's going to be coaching Monday and hopefully has a successful night this coming Monday night, he lives by one thing, what he calls, little jab, sorry, had to do it. We got nothing else. So anyway, Nick Saban lives by what he calls the process. The process. Nick Saban basically says, I don't want you to think about the national championship until it's time to think about the national championship. Right now, I want you to think about the next film session, and the next workout session, and the next drill, and the next run, and the next tackle and the next play. And I want you, whatever you're focused on at that moment, I want you to finish that. Because if you finish that, then you'll get to the next. Then you'll get to the next. Then you'll get to the next. And then you'll wake up one day and you're going to be playing in the national championship as long as you finish. It's what he calls the process. And he's infamous for when he wins the national championship, he celebrates for about 30 minutes. And he goes back to his office and he works on the process. Drilling down to one thing. John the Baptist had one thing. Matthew documented it this way. He referred back to an old quote back in Isaiah when he said that John the Baptist is a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight the paths for him. John the Baptist's only why, his only purpose, his only reality in living on this earth was to be a forerunner for Jesus, to let people know, hey, Jesus is coming. Kind of reminds me of that congressional forerunner right before the State of the Union. Walks into the House chambers and says, hey, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. And then half the room goes nuts and the other half is like, boo, or whatever. They really don't do that, but they want to. That's what John the Baptist, his whole purpose was. So here's the question. What's your why? What's your one thing? What's the purpose for which you were here? What's your single act this year? It's the day before New Year. It's a day that's pumped full of anticipation. You're going to work out. You're going to eat kale the rest of the year. One-arm push-ups, all of that. Until Thursday, and then you'll be like, you know what, I'm just going to get a milkshake. We've got gospel anticipation. We've got spiritual discipline anticipation. We've got anticipation for our businesses. We've got anticipation for our relationships. So here's the question. What's the one thing, because you can't do it all. We're not built to do it all. So what's the one thing that you can lock in and be laser focused on, that when January 1st comes tomorrow, you go, this is why I'm here. And then when May 2nd comes, in a few months, you can wake up and go, hey, the thing I was here for on January 1st, I'm still here for that today. And then when January or June 13th comes, then you can say, hey, remember the thing I was here for in March and January? I'm still here for that today. Can you imagine if you just locked in on one thing for a year? The impact, the power, what you would see just by doing that one thing. Based on who you are, what you know, the skill you have, what influence you have, what you read, what you see. Based on all of that, what is your single act this coming year? You have to be confronted with that question. And one of the reasons you have to be confronted with that question is because you need to know where to invest your time, your energy, your resource. But guess what? We need to know if we're going to be on board with you. And so when you answer that, you help give us clarity if we're the ones that are going to be tag teaming this with you, because you're going to need other people to do it. So what's your single act? What could you do with your business? What could you do with refugees? What could you do with people that you know who are in relational poverty? What could you do with people who are in fiscal poverty this year? What could you do with people who are in disease? You remember that old song in the 80s, Foreigner? I want to know what love is. Like, it was, some of you, y'all were like 18 and 29. You're like, I want to know what love is. We all want to know that. We all want to know what that is. We want to know what that one thing is. To love people. It's part of our mission, right? As a church, love God, love people, bring the two together. But how do you love? I know some of you have that lyric, who do you love? Wrong question. How do you love? When your single act is deployed and goes out, it's packaged as love. It looks like love, even though what it is it's buying canned goods for this person. It looks like love, even though what it is you're helping a friend of yours get into fiscal health. It looks like love when really what you're doing is you're sitting bedside with somebody who's really, really, really sick, and you're helping them die well. They're not going to say, they sat by me and I was really, really, really sick. And what they're going to say is, they loved me while I was dying. The delivery and the implementation of your one thing, your single act of kindness, is a response towards deep affection for another person. 1 John 4:8 says that God is love, and so when we display a single act of love in the name of Jesus, we can be sure that we are living out the love that God is. So we're living in His image at that point. When we find our one thing and we live that out to other people, we get to say that we are emulating God at that moment when we do it in the name of Jesus. Final verse, 1 John 4:18. John tells us that when we live out God's love, it slaps fear, chaos. You've heard it this way. Perfect love casts out all fear. Really what it literally means is that it slaps fear in the face. Perfect love slaps fear in the face, and it slaps away insecurity and brokenness. So when you wake up tomorrow, Monday, January 1st, I want to know, what is your motif? What is the one thing that this year is going to be tied to the collection of other one things throughout your life that is creating your hit single? What is the single act that you're going to work towards every day this year and build and build and build and build and build and build into a song that we can all sing together? So what do you do now? You pray, you go get in your car on the way home and you go, hey God, what is that for me? And you're going to go, I feel really awkward speaking to nobody. My cell phone's not on. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Get in your car and you just say, God, I don't know what that is for me. So you ask. It's number one. Number two, you write it down. Write it down. Ashley and I went away to Savannah this week. We took a cheap little dollar notebook and we wrote down probably, 10, 15 pages of dreams, desires that line up with our family vision, because we've got that written out, and our mission. And we wrote all of that stuff down. We actually put budget numbers to it all, which I loved, actually hated, but we did it anyway. And we've got all of these dreams that we've got laid out for this coming year, so we've got great clarity on what we're trying to do. Are we going to hit it all? No, absolutely not, but it's written down. Go ask, go write it down, and then go do it. Go do it. One of the goals that we have for our family is once a month Friday game night. We've never done it before. We're going to try it this year, see how it goes. And so guess what? Friday came. This Friday was going to be our first time. Friday came, and there was moments where we were like, we don't need to do it. We don't need to do it. We don't need to. And then finally we just bucked up and did it. Ordered the pizza, got together, played the games, had a blast, fussed, argued a little bit, laughed a lot, and we just did it. You're not going to feel like doing it. So go ask, write it down, and then act. Go do it. And once you begin to find out your why, you're going to be able to better understand the why behind Jesus and why he came for you. And it'll be a powerful year. Let me pray for us. God, I pray in the name of Jesus that you would help us to understand what the single act for us, for each of us individually this year is. I pray that you would give us the time and the courage to actually sit down and write it down. And then I pray for the motivation the rest of the year to act.